Hi everyone, my name is Paul Catino and I did my project on the Chip Ross Natural Area of Corvallis, Oregon. The big reason I wanted to do Chip Ross was because it's a park that I visit regularly. I like to run there because it's open year round and my dog can be off leash. It's also connected to other trails in the Oregon State University research forests. There's limited bike and horse use, which I'm not a big fan of bikes or horses on the trail. And also I really like the unique ecological features of the site, which makes it a popular birding site. Chip Ross was part of a larger movement by Corvallis residents to ensure that future citizens would have access to local natural areas. It's named after Charles and Elsie Ross, who were a part of the Greenbelt Trust movement. It's in honor of their son. Traditionally, it was mostly prairie and oak habitat, but there was some major restoration work done in 2016 to return it to its traditional ecological state. The basic objectives of my site visit were to explore the environmental, social, and managerial components of this particular park. We're going to be looking at potential user disagreements, areas where there might be some overuse occurring, some of the ecological goals and management of the site, the trail conditions, and looking for any graffiti that we see. The primary way that I obtained the information was by visiting the park itself. I go there quite a lot, and I've been there in participation of several different events, such as walking tours, and even organized a volunteer event with the student club that I work with to go out and work with Steve McGettigan from Corvallis Parks and Recs to do a volunteer project there. So first we'll start off with the environmental components of the park. We're going to talk a little bit about litter, some of the signs of traffic where there's some unauthorized trail use, and some of the indicators of restoration that are still present on the site. As you can see in these photos here, there's quite a bit of off-trail use that occurs. Many of these started as unauthorized trails but have become more and more prominent to the point where the city has incorporated them into the trail network. The problem is that they're not properly built trails, and so a lot of them you can see in both of these there's a lot of gully erosion happening, and in the photo on the right you can actually notice how all the sediment is piling onto the road. This is kind of a big problem in Chip Ross because it's pretty steep and a lot of the roads are cut into banks, and so where people jump up onto the hillside and make these new trails, it causes a lot of erosion issues. One of the reasons that Chip Ross is so unique in the city is that it has undergone a major oak restoration project. Doing oak restoration is a really popular treatment that's occurring in Oregon in the Willamette Valley. It's a very historic ecosystem that was maintained by indigenous burning, and so the effort of the city to bring back this park, in my opinion, is really important. And so here you can just see a little before and after of these oaks that have kind of been overgrown by other vegetation over time, and the city hired a private forestry company to come on in and take out all of the firs and just leave these kind of open grown wide canopy oaks to be left behind. For the ecologists among us, there are plenty of signs all over the park that the oak restoration is relatively recent. In the photo on the left here, you can see an old oak stump, and this is a regeneration method of oak trees. It's sprouting from the crown of the stump. And then on the right, you can see the stump of a pretty large Douglas fir. There were a lot of firs that were removed, and that has helped finance a lot of the restoration efforts that have been going on in the follow-up of the project, such as seeding and slash pile burning and trail maintenance. Here you can see some other efforts of the park to do some maintenance. The photo on the left, there's a pretty clear line where some mowing or other vegetation control occurred, and the brushy part is actually all poison oak. And so you can kind of see that the city has maintained this beautiful open prairie look and has made a pretty good effort to remove the vegetation. The photo on the right is sort of this aging sign. It's adjacent to other private property, and to be honest, if you look down there, it doesn't look super sensitive, but it is cool that the city is trying to make the effort to keep people from walking into areas where they found really unique wildflowers coming out of this area. Of course, because Chip Ross is so close to the city, and I know a lot of people like to come up there at night. I've seen people up there at night before. Graffiti is always a problem, and of course, when people do graffiti and vandalism on trees, it takes a long time for it to recover. So next we'll jump right into the social aspects of the park. For the most part, through looking at online trail websites and things like that, people really like Chip Ross. People are very satisfied. They say nice things about it. However, there were some recent concerns over the trail conditions. But overall, what Chip Ross offers is a pretty gentle, natural space that has really nice views, and it's quiet. It feels like you're in solitude, even though you're quite close to the city. Through looking at the city's website regarding Chip Ross Natural Area, it's clear that their PR effort is directed at addressing the concerns of the community over a lot of trail damage. The main road system in Chip Ross is actually a vehicle road, and it was used to log out all of the old trees when the restoration project happened in 2016. And as a result, the road was pretty significantly degraded. And so on the left, you can kind of see what's happened is these old culverts have just sort of been washing and eroding away, and they've created these really nasty, muddy spots. And I remember it the last 2 years, it was really bad. But this year, you can actually see that there's a lot of current work being done. They actually brought a trencher in and dug trenches and helped dig ditches. And my student club went up there and we did a volunteer work party and came out and dug ditches and kind of worked on water bars, and that was a lot of fun. So it's cool that the city is getting a lot of work done out there. As I mentioned before, Chip Ross is home to some really nice views. So in this photo, you can see the outline of Mary's Peak, which is the highest peak in the Coast Range. Along with views of the Coast Range, you can actually make out most of the Cascade Mountains on a clear day, as well as a really expansive view of the Willamette Valley, and you can see the whole of Corvallis from the top of Chip Ross. So for the managerial concerns of the park, I'm going to talk about their efforts to do trail upkeep, as well as some of the future restoration concepts that are going to need to be done to maintain the old oak restoration projects. We'll talk about some of the interpretive signage that they have in the park, as well as some of their seasonal closures. So as I mentioned before, the city has actually done a lot of work to bring in trenchers and help to dig out these banks. Unfortunately, to me, it seems like a little bit of a losing battle because they did a lot of this work over the winter. And like in this photo, you can actually see that a lot of the sediment is building up rather quickly in these little ditches, which means to me like they're going to need to be dug out every year or designed differently so that they're not continually getting erosion of sediment filling them up. You can see here, these are kind of the conditions of Chip Ross, is this really steep cut bank and this ditch that keeps filling in. This entire side is pretty prone to seasonal flooding, and during the winter it's pretty nasty. They've tried a couple different methods to kind of keep it from getting so wet, but definitely this is one of the major managerial concerns is the quality of the road and the trails in Chip Ross. So the other major thing is how to maintain this restoration project. So if you look at this photo, this is a pretty traditional oak savanna, oak woodland. Now what has happened over the last 70 years as a result of fire exclusion and basically non-management is that this entire area was grown in with firs and other different trees. And so in order to bring back this kind of unique and endangered really oak woodland habitat, the city kind of went in and harvested all of these trees and burned a bunch of slash piles. And so now, a few years later, the city is sort of asking, well, what's next? And so through talking with the urban forester of the city who helped with the maintenance of this park, as well as some of the foresters who helped execute the actual project, the contracting foresters, one of the major possibilities is doing prescribed fire because technically the park is outside of city limits. So that's going to raise a big issue managerially for public awareness, public safety, and just kind of the social acceptability of this type of management practice and the feasibility that it has for kind of maintaining the oak savanna ecosystem. So as I mentioned before, one of the reasons that I really like Chip Ross is because there are no paved trails, and so basically what the sign is saying is that there are no bikes and horses until May 23rd. Unfortunately, you do see a lot of bikers The reason that I don't really care for bikes and horses on walking trails is because they tend to cause a lot of erosion and degrade trail conditions, and trail conditions are pretty important to me, particularly in high traffic areas. So I do appreciate this, that the city does kind of draw a line and close off access while it's too muddy. So I'll go ahead and talk about some of the recommendations that I had for future management. Basically working with the neighbors who own property adjacent, definitely masticating or burning it as a continued restoration effort to maintain the oak woodland, and then increasing the educational signage and doing some poison oak control. So in these photos here, you can see some of the properties that are adjacent to Chip Ross, and they're both in ownership of, one of them is in ownership of the city and the other is owned by Oregon State University. So you can kind of see the fir starting to encroach on the photo on the left. This is the start of the conditions that we're trying to be restored in Chip Ross. And then on the right, you can see that the trees are kind of growing in pretty dense. So as those trees get bigger, they get more difficult to deal with. So it would be nice if Chip Ross could kind of continue these ecological goals and work with their neighbors to help make this habitat patch as large as possible through treating adjacent properties. I think regular mastication or prescribed fire is going to be a necessary component, and I think that it would be wise to communicate with the city and ensure that public perception and acceptance is okay with prescribed fire, and if they're not, then engaging in a pretty significant education campaign, because having a park that they can go visit is really a great way to help convey the message that prescribed fire is not all bad, and it actually can be very beneficial when applied correctly. Because so many people in Corvallis, particularly in highly educated areas, are kind of oftentimes they're against a lot of forms of forest management, even if they are intended to be for restoration. And so I think that a major portion of the Chip Ross restoration project should be increased signage about what oak habitat is and what we need to do as humans and managers to ensure that it stays here. I think that another major goal of the city should be basically complete eradication of poison oak in the Chip Ross area, at least in most places. It's pretty common throughout the entire park, and I know it gets all over my dog. I don't really get poison oak too bad, but I think that one of the big benefits of burning the whole area would be to maintain a basically poison oak free environment. So that wraps up my presentation on Chip Ross. I appreciate you all paying attention, and if you live in Corvallis, I would highly recommend you come check out the park. Thanks. So that wraps up my presentation on Chip Ross. I appreciate you all paying attention, and if you live in Corvallis, I would highly recommend you come check out the park. Thanks.